Some towns feel like they're protected by their own innocence. Pocatello, Idaho, nestled in the heart of Bannock County, was one of those places. It's a landscape carved by mountains and sprawling plains where the horizon feels endless and the community feels close-knit. In the fall of 2006, it was a place of high school football games under bright Friday night lights, of leaves turning brilliant shades of gold and crimson, of a comforting, predictable rhythm. Life here wasn't supposed to be the stuff of nightmares. It was a world of unlocked doors and trusting neighbors, a place where the darkness that lurked in movie theaters felt a million miles away from the quiet, tree-lined streets. For the Stoddart family, and for their bright, animal-loving daughter Cassie Jo, this world felt safe. It felt like home. Cassie Jo Stoddart was 16 years old, a vibrant junior at Pocatello High School. She was on the cusp of everything. She had a cascade of dark hair, a bright, easy smile, and a personality that drew people in. To her family, she was the responsible, loving daughter and older sister. To her friends, she was a trusted confidant, someone you could talk to about anything. She had a serious, nurturing side, especially when it came to animals, a passion that her family believed might one day shape her future. She was in a happy relationship with her boyfriend, Matt Beckham, a fellow student who shared her world of classes, friends, and weekend plans. Cassie was navigating that familiar teenage terrain of growing independence, balancing schoolwork, her social life, and responsibilities that made her feel just that little bit more grown up. She was, in every sense, a girl with a future, her path stretching out before her, full of promise and potential. On Friday, September 22, 2006, one of those grown-up responsibilities presented itself. Cassie's aunt and uncle, Allison and Frank Contreras, were heading out of town for the weekend. They needed a house sitter, someone they could trust to look after their home on the quiet and remote Whispering Cliffs Drive, and more importantly, to care for their beloved pets, 3 cats and 2 dogs. Cassie was the obvious choice. She was dependable. The house was beautiful, but isolated, perched on a hill on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place where the silence at night was broken only by the whisper of the wind through the pines. For a 16-year-old, a weekend of independence in such a large, quiet house felt like an adventure, a welcome taste of freedom. She packed a small bag, ready for a peaceful weekend of watching movies and looking after the animals she so adored. That evening, the house on Whispering Cliffs wasn't quiet for long. Cassie's boyfriend, Matt Beckham, arrived around 6 o'clock. A cozy, normal Friday night began to take shape. They were just 2 teenagers, happy in each other's company, the sprawling, empty house their private little world for the weekend. A short time later, they had more company. 2 of their classmates from Pocatello High, Draper and Torey Adamcik, showed up. On the surface, their arrival was nothing out of the ordinary. They were all part of the same teenage social fabric. Brian and Torey were 16, just like Cassie. They were known figures in the school hallways, not close friends perhaps, but familiar faces. They'd come to hang out, a phrase that defined 1,000 teenage evenings. Cassie, ever the gracious host, welcomed them in. She gave them a tour of the large home, showing them the living room, the kitchen, and even the cavernous, unfinished basement. The 4 teenagers settled in to watch a movie, the sounds of the film filling the living room as darkness fell outside. To Matt and Cassie, it was just a typical night. There was laughter, casual conversation, the easy camaraderie of youth. Brian and Torey seemed relaxed, just 2 more friends sharing a Friday night. But beneath the surface of this placid scene, a sinister secret was taking root. During the tour of the house, while Cassie's attention was elsewhere, one of the boys had quietly, deftly, unlocked the basement door that led to the outside. It was a small, unobserved action, a silent betrayal committed in the middle of a friendly gathering. As the movie played on, as the four of them shared snacks and jokes, that unlocked door waited, a hidden gateway back into the house, a silent accomplice in a plot that was as unthinkable as it was evil. After a couple of hours, Brian Draper announced that he and Torey had to leave. They had other plans, they said, maybe a movie to catch at the local theater. They said their goodbyes, casual and friendly, melting back into the night just as they had arrived. The house grew quiet again, occupied only by Cassie, Matt, and the animals. But the atmosphere had subtly shifted. A short while after the boys left, the house was plunged into sudden, absolute darkness. The lights, the television, everything went dead. In the unnerving silence that followed, a flicker of fear sparked. It was just a power outage, they reasoned, but in the large, isolated house, it felt menacing. Matt tried to soothe Cassie's nerves. Then, just as suddenly as they had gone out, some of the lights flickered back on. The strange event left them both unsettled. The Contreras' dogs seemed on edge too, one of them staring intently at the basement door, letting out a low, intermittent growl as if sensing something that the humans could not. The unsettling power outage had shaken Cassie. The remote location of the house, once a symbol of freedom, now felt like a vulnerability. The darkness outside the windows seemed deeper, the silence more profound. Seeing her fear, Matt did what any caring boyfriend would do. He called his mother and asked if he could stay the night to keep Cassie company and make her feel safe. His mother, however, said no, but she offered a compromise. Cassie was more than welcome to come and stay at their house for the night. Matt could bring her back in the morning. For a moment, that seemed like the solution. But Cassie was a responsible girl. She had a job to do. She had promised her aunt and uncle she would look after the pets. She couldn't just abandon them. And so, with a mix of reluctance and determination, she made the fateful decision to stay. Matt, respecting her sense of duty, promised to call her and check in. Around 10:30 p.m., his mother arrived to pick him up. They said their goodbyes, leaving Cassie alone in the vast, quiet house, the sole guardian of the home and its animals. After leaving Cassie, Matt Beckham tried to reconnect with Brian and Torey. He called Torey's phone, thinking perhaps they could all still meet up. But the call went unanswered. He didn't know that at that very moment his two classmates were not at a movie theater. They had parked their car down the street from the Contreras residence, hidden from view. They were changing clothes, pulling on dark outfits, gloves, and grotesque, pale, screaming masks, the kind made famous by a horror movie. They were transforming themselves from familiar classmates into monstrous apparitions, their humanity concealed behind a veneer of cheap plastic. They were armed with knives purchased weeks earlier, with a chilling sense of premeditation. They crept back towards the house, their forms swallowed by the Idaho night, their minds set on a goal that defied all reason and compassion. They were no longer just teenage boys, they were predators, and the unlocked basement door was their way in. Inside, alone, Cassie tried to settle her nerves. The house was silent again, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft sounds of the animals. But then the terrifying disorientation returned. The power cut out again, plunging the entire house into an even more profound blackness. Panic began to rise in her chest. From the basement, the boys listened, waited, hoping the loss of power would lure her downstairs to check the circuit breaker. When she didn't come, they decided to escalate their campaign of terror. They crept up the basement stairs. At the top, one of them violently slammed open a closet door, the sound exploding into the stillness of the house. It was a deliberate, cruel act designed to terrify her. Cassie, who had been resting on the living room couch, was now fully awake and gripped by absolute fear. The source of the noises, the reason for the power failure, it was all inside the house with her. In that moment of pure terror, the two figures emerged from the shadows. The last thing Cassie Jo Stoddart ever saw were the horrifying masks of her so-called friends, their knives glinting in the faint moonlight that filtered through the windows. The attack was brutal, swift, and utterly merciless. They stabbed her again and again, a frenzy of violence that extinguished the life of a bright, vibrant 16-year-old girl. 2 days later, on Sunday, September 24th, Allison and Frank Contreras returned home. They walked into a scene of unimaginable horror. The silence that greeted them was wrong, heavy. They found their niece, Cassie, in the living room. The bright, responsible girl they had entrusted with their home was gone, replaced by a brutal tableau of violence. The authorities were called, and the quiet street on Whispering Cliffs Drive was soon flooded with the flashing lights of police cars and emergency vehicles. The investigation began immediately. Detectives from the Bannock County Sheriff's Office descended on the scene, their faces grim. It didn't take them long to identify the last people known to have seen Cassie alive: her boyfriend, Matt Beckham, and her two classmates, Brian Draper and Torey Adamcik. Matt Beckham was the first to be questioned. Heartbroken and in shock, he told the police everything he knew about that Friday night. He described the gathering, the movie, and the unsettling power outage that had frightened Cassie. Crucially, he told them that Brian and Torey had been there. He provided a clear timeline. The boys had left, he had left, and Cassie had been left alone. His story was coherent, his grief palpable. Investigators quickly cleared him of any suspicion. The focus then shifted squarely onto Brian Draper and Torey Adamcik. They were brought in for questioning two 16-year-old boys now at the center of a murder investigation. They presented a united front, telling detectives that they had left Cassie's house-sitting job and gone to the local movie theater, and then went home. It was a simple, plausible alibi. But for seasoned investigators, something about their story, their demeanor, didn't feel right. The detectives began the painstaking work of verifying the boys' alibi. They checked with the movie theater, but there was no evidence that Brian and Torey had ever been there that night. The cracks in their story began to appear. As the pressure mounted, the bond between the two boys started to fracture. It was Brian Draper who broke first. During a subsequent interrogation, he changed his story. He admitted that they had returned to the house, but, he claimed, it was all Torey's idea. He painted himself as a reluctant follower, a passive observer to a plan masterminded and executed by his friend. He insisted that he was in the house, but that he had not been the one to inflict the fatal wounds. He was trying to save himself, to shift the blame, but in doing so he placed himself at the scene of the crime. Brian Draper's confession, self-serving as it was, gave investigators the leverage they needed. He agreed to lead them to the evidence. He took them to a remote, desolate spot in Black Rock Canyon, a rugged area outside of Pocatello. There, buried in the dirt, was a cache of damning evidence. Police unearthed the dark clothing, the gloves, the ghoulish masks, and the two knives used in the murder. But they found something else, something that would provide a horrifying, unprecedented window into the minds of the killers. Buried with the other items was a videotape. This tape would become the heart of the prosecution's case, a chilling testament to the cold, calculated nature of the murder. It was a homemade movie, a real-life horror film starring two teenage killers. The videotape was a revelation. It was a visual diary of their plot. In clips filmed in the days and hours leading up to the murder, Brian Draper and Torey Adamcik spoke directly to the camera, their faces alight with a disturbing excitement. They documented their plan with chilling clarity. They talked about their desire for fame, to be remembered like the killers from their favorite slasher film, Scream. They discussed their choice of victim, calmly weighing their options before settling on Cassie. They filmed themselves in the car on the way to the Contreras house, their dialogue a sickening mix of teenage bravado and homicidal intent. "We're going for a high death count," one of them said. They were creating their own script, a narrative of murder where they were the stars. The tape was more than a confession, it was a performance. The most disturbing portion of the tape was filmed shortly after the murder. The camera is shaky, the boys are back in the car, their adrenaline still pumping, the masks are off, and their faces are visible. They are giddy, almost euphoric. "I just killed Cassie," Torey Adamcik says, his voice a mixture of awe and excitement. They recounted the details of the crime, their voices overlapping in a frantic debrief. They expressed no remorse, no regret, only a narcissistic thrill at what they had accomplished. They talked about seeing her body, about the finality of the act. The tape was an irrefutable chronicle of their guilt, a self-made monument to their own depravity. For the investigators and later for the jury, it was the ultimate evidence, a direct broadcast from the heart of darkness. It removed all doubt, all possibility of a misunderstood prank. It was a clear, cold-blooded blueprint for murder. The trials of Brian Draper and Torey Adamcik were held separately. The evidence against them was overwhelming. The centerpiece, of course, was the videotape. Jurors watched in stunned silence as the two boys, in their own words and with their own images, detailed their plot from conception to its brutal execution. The prosecution laid out the timeline, from the purchasing of the knives to the unlocking of the basement door to the terrorizing and ultimate murder of Cassie Jo Stoddart. Friends of the boys testified, painting a picture of two teenagers who had become obsessed with horror films and the dark allure of notoriety. The defense attorneys tried to argue that it was all a fantasy, a script for a movie that had gone horribly wrong, but the evidence, from the buried weapons to the chilling words on the tape, told a different, undeniable story. In April of 2007, Brian Draper was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. 2 months later, in June, Torey Adamcik's trial ended with the same verdict. The community of Pocatello, which had been reeling since the discovery of Cassie's body, finally had a measure of justice. On August 21, 2007, the two boys, now 17, stood before a judge to receive their sentences. For the brutal, senseless and meticulously planned murder of their classmate, both Brian Draper and Torey Adamcik were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. An additional sentence of 30 years to life was added for the conspiracy charge. The gavel fell, and two young lives, which had been dedicated to achieving infamy through an act of ultimate evil, were effectively over. The murder of Cassie Jo Stoddart left a deep and permanent scar on the community of Pocatello. The sense of safety, the feeling of innocence that had once defined the town, was shattered. The case served as a horrifying reminder that darkness can fester anywhere, even in the hearts of two seemingly normal 16-year-old boys. For Cassie's family, the pain is unending, a life sentence of their own. They lost a daughter, a sister, a source of light and love for the most trivial of reasons, the thrill-seeking, fame-hungry fantasy of two of her peers. The legacy of the case is a tragic one, a cautionary tale about the dark influence of media, the warning signs of disturbed youth, and the devastating consequences of a culture that can sometimes glorify violence. The videotape they made ensured that Brian Draper and Torey Adamcik would be remembered, but not as the infamous icons they dreamed of becoming. Instead, they are remembered as the architects of a senseless tragedy, the boys who traded their humanity for a starring role in their own pathetic, real-life horror movie, leaving a void in the world that can never be filled.